Now I want to talk about how QDM, quality deer management, can mold and shape your hunting, let alone your habitat management. And it really encompasses everything whitetail. It's the foundation of everything I teach. Because I first became a QDM advocate back in '98. I joined the QDMA in 1998. I became a life member in '04. I was into it enough that I received the Al Brothers Deer Manager of the Year Award from the QDMA in 2004. And really, the founding principles of QDM, I even started branches. I started a branch in 2004 in the UP in Michigan. I organized meetings in '99 and 2000. I went to dozens of meetings around the state of Michigan to talk about QDM as a QDM advocate. I wholly believe in QDM. There's the QDMA, the national organization, but even there, that's not the beginning or the origin of QDM. The QDM principles that really mold and shape everything you do and can actually really help you with your land, your herd management, where to hunt, how to hunt, what public land to go on. So QDM and the founding biological principles are critical. I believe they started sometime in the early '90s. The first I heard of QDM being practiced was out of the Buffalo County area in Wisconsin. That's where they recognize you pass young bucks, you get old bucks. If you balance the population, you can create mega properties and incredible areas of deer and deer management. Completely different trophy management. Trophy management, you're trying to get a buck to its oldest age, its peak age, and then you go out and shoot it. Sometimes trophy management areas and fences, they have skewed sex ratios where they have 2 bucks for every doe. It's not a balanced population. QDM is about balance. Having bucks grow old to their 6 or 7 is actually QDM in some locations. But in most locations, it's not. Most locations, Michigan that I've hunted, Pennsylvania, you're looking at a 2-year-old buck, maybe a 3-year-old buck to harvest, and occasionally every 5-10 years you might have a 4-year-old come through. That's in a good area in some of those states. Some states, I've been to properties where they haven't seen an antlered buck in 7 years during the daylight. QDM can help that, can help bring that up. Your expectation should be higher than that, but that doesn't mean that area is going to turn into a 3-year-old buck every year type area. So you have to be very realistic with your expectations. Again, it goes back to balance. QDM, 3 things, very, very important. Adequate buck age structure. That's one of the founding principles of quality deer management. Adequate buck age structure. It's all relative. In your area, that might be that a really good buck is 3 years old. Your average age is 1.75, 2, whatever it is. Another area, the average age of bucks might be 6 years old. The top end, I'm saying the top end might be 6 years old, and that average age structure is 3.5 or 4. Adequate. It's all relative to the area. That's number 1. Appropriate sex ratios. What's appropriate? Again, balance. There's some properties in the same neighborhood that have 10 does for every buck. In that same neighborhood, they might have far, far fewer deer, but they have 3 bucks for every doe. And then there's that QDM property with balance, where you achieve that balance where not too many does. For that, you get an adequate number, a huge number of bucks, but it's more in line with those does. It's hard to say what's appropriate, 2.5 to 1, 2.5 does to 1 buck. Rest assured, if you're seeing 10 does to every buck, there's a neighbor somewhere seeing more bucks than does. Because fawns are born close to 50% buck and doe, you can never have a buck to doe ratio that's over 4 to 5 does to 1 buck. It's something like that. It might even be 3.5. It's a lot lower number than you'd think. So again, if you're seeing 10 to 1 does to bucks, that's not appropriate. And there's a lot of things you can do different than that. And at the same time, if you're only seeing 10 deer a year and you see 5 bucks and 5 does, or you see 6 bucks and you see 2 does, whatever it might be, there's a lot more balance you could achieve to see 3 or 4 times as many bucks per year and more appropriate number of does. Again, it goes back to adequate buck age structure, number 1. Appropriate sex ratios, number 2. And number 3, populations maintained in balance with the land, with the habitat. What kind of habitat do you have? In the UP of Michigan where I was at, they average about 15 deer per square mile. Pretty low in that middle area. When you get up along the Lake Superior shoreline, it only supports about 3 to 5 deer per square mile. That's 3 to 5 deer in an entire section of land. That's about the balance due to the severity of winter, the lack of quality food sources, the lack of quality habitat, the depth of snow, the migration routes, the long migration to yarding areas. severely limited, but still at 3 to 5, it's maintaining population with in balance with the habitat that population is. In other areas with high quality food, forage, habitat, lack of winter severity, enough cover, enough food to go around, you could have 40 deer per square mile, maybe even 50. So there's no one set of buck age structure. There's no one set of sex ratio that's appropriate. There's no one number of deer per square mile that is appropriate for your area. It's all about balance and going back to it. Those are the three founding principles of QDM. Again, I'm going to repeat this. Buck age structure, sex ratios, and populations in balance with the habitat. Those three are QDM. Now the QDMA is a great organization. They have lots of other things that encompasses that. Getting youth into hunting. There's a lot of good things when it comes to getting hunters involved in deer hunting in general, increasing hunter numbers, retaining hunter numbers. Incredible organization. There's a lot of science that is in the QDMA. However, to achieve QDM, a lot of times you have to throw science out the window. You have to throw a lot of hunting strategy in, and you have to achieve balance, and you can't rely on going by someone else's numbers that are appropriate with QDM. This is something I've been involved in for over 2 decades at a very high level. I've contributed 15 to 20 articles to the QDMA, a Quality Whitetails magazine, in the past. It's a cause that I believe in greatly, but it always goes back to the cause that I believe and support in the most are those 3 biological principles of QDM, quality deer management. So I'm going to look at these 3, just break them down for you. And I want you to stick around the end, because this is my QDM pyramid. Mine, I made this up. This is something that I believe in. This is how I viewed it for many years. This is how I've talked online and hunting circles going back to the early 2000s. Something I believe in, something I always go back to these roots. And if you go to these roots, it'll help you on your own land. It'll help you understand public land, why some public land areas are better than others. But I want you to stick around, because there's a foundation to QDM that you have to achieve to even have a chance of coming close to your balanced QDM potential. Stick around to the end, because it's important. First off, buck age structure. Number 1, it's all relative. We talked about that. Your area, my area, could be 2 different things. When I go out to Pennsylvania to hunt public land there, I enjoy it because they've set up regulations that have protected young bucks, so they do have an older age structure of bucks. I should know I haven't hunted as long as a lot of Pennsylvania hunters, but I have hunted there since I was 23 years old during 93. 93 was my first season hunting out there. Last year, I hunted the last 2 years out in Pennsylvania, but I've hunted 19 opening days. The difference in the deer herd that I've seen over the years, you've gone from 40 deer at one time coming through the hollow, and there's so many deer that you can't even shoot the one little antlered buck that might be a spike or 4-pointer because there's so many deer around them, to now if you see 10, 12 deer in one day, you're probably going to see a nice buck. And I mean like a 2 or 3 year old buck. And there's 4 and 5 year olds out there too. But I adjust my expectations there compared to where my new land will be in Minnesota, or I hunt in Southwest Wisconsin, or where I hunt in Michigan. Michigan and Pennsylvania public land are about the same. Ohio, I up that because it's a little bit different down there. They have different circumstances. They have better habitat. They don't have winter kill of any kind. A lot less snow. And so it's a little bit different down there. The age structure is a little bit higher down there. Again, all relative. And that's why it's not trophy management. That's why quality deer management is so different, because you're looking for a balance. What can you achieve in your area? What can we achieve when we take all hunters out of the area, we fence it off, we see how old the buck can get to 6 or 7, we take him at his prime antler size, and that's not QDM. 6 or 7 year old can be QDM in some areas, but very, very few. I would say less than 1% of the entire country. Number 2, you have to have fall habitat to find a good buck age structure. Buck age structures are not made during the summertime. In fact, bucks during the summer do not live where they're going to in the fall the majority of the time. Summer food they need of beans, alfalfa, leaves, woody shrub tips. They need shaded habitat. They need cool airflow. They're going to live in areas during the summer that not only they not live in the fall, but they can't live in. They can't live in the open cover. The summer food is gone. So bucks move greatly to find good habitat. And if you're going to find a buckage structure and you're going to create a good buckage structure, you have to have fall habitat, and you can't have summer habitat at the expense of fall habitat. Because if you do, you're never going to reach your QDM potential. And I mean QDM potential, if you have quality deer, you have deer that are healthy. Obviously, you know, there's some cases where you could say, well, I have summer habitat, summer food, so I put 3 pounds more body weight on that buck. He's 182 instead of 179, or he's 252 instead of 249. But if you don't have that fall habitat and he goes on your neighbor and he's shot as a 2-year-old or a 1.5 year old, then you didn't accomplish anything. I have a saying, healthy dead bucks don't grow either. And think about that. No matter what you do in the summertime, if you're not holding that buck during the fall, you're not going to create not only a good buck age structure, but you're not going to get these 3 to happen right here at all. So you have to have quality fall habitat, which means high stem count, briars, woody shrub tips, acorn or mass production, not necessary, but you have to have enough browse for their bedding areas, and then you have to have those high quality food sources. Number 3, you have to have low hunting pressure. It's all for naught. If you just have great fall cover, great fall food, and you don't manage your hunt, and you spook those deer off, guess what? Not only can you not achieve your QDM potential, but you're actually probably doing more harm than good, because you attracted more deer to your land only to educate them, and you create an attract repel condition that actually lowers not only your potential but the entire potential in the area, because you're pushing deer across borders at a very high percentage over and over again. That exposes them to roads, predation, an excess number of hunters. And so that high level of attraction you create on your land is not QDM. Managing your hunt and finding these 3 ingredients of QDM is QDM. Just because you create a bunch of habitat and you spend a lot of money and you say, well, I'm just helping the herd. Well, if they all come in at night and you're not managing your hunt, you're not doing a good job. You're actually anti-QDM. Number 2, population and balance with the habitat. How do we do that? Number 1, so many properties that put a huge amount of dollars into habitat are creating Doe factories. And what that means is does are here today, here to stay. Say that all the time, but it's because does crave high stem count cover during the summertime for fawning grounds. There's a huge competition for fawning grounds. So if those does are there because of the stem count, bucks are not there on good fall cover during the summer because they can't crash their velvet through that high stem count area. They don't want to crash their velvet through hardwood regeneration and high stem count. For example, aspen, 7,000 shoots per acre, all those whips in the second year that are 6-7 feet tall. Do you think a buck wants to crash his velvet through there during the summer? He does not, but that is exactly where he wants to live during the fall. So if you have good fall cover and you offer a lot of great summer food, guess what? You create the conditions for summer fawning habitat that is very competitive. The number of those does and fawns grow, and there's simply not enough room left over for bucks when it gets into the fall. And that's at 10-to-1 property where you see a lot of does, not a lot of bucks. Who cares if they come in during the rut? Because if you can only control the herd, the buck herd, for a week or 2 out of the entire season, then you're not going to accomplish anything. And for that, when you have all those does, there's going to be a certain percentage of those mature bucks that just don't want to come on your land at all. What I see is a diminishing return with a lot of QDM parcels, quote QDM parcels, where they're putting a lot of money into habitat. 10 years later, they've never had more of a nocturnal herd. They've never had more does. And they're scratching their head wondering why, because they keep throwing money at the problem, keep throwing habitat improvements at the problem, and it's getting worse and worse. And that is the root right there, Doe factories. And what's the first step in reducing deer populations and starting to achieve that balance? It isn't trigger control. That's second or third down the line. It isn't more doe tags. That's second or third down the line. It isn't having doe party shoots and driving deer to try to get more does. That's way down the line. The first step in population control is either adding summer food or reducing or eliminating summer food. When I was in the UP in Michigan and I received the Al Brothers Deer Manager of the Year Award, is because I built my deer herd. That's still QDM. Again, I'm trying to achieve that balance. So I'd written an article describing how I'd increase the number of does to 7 or 8, increase the number of bucks where I saw 5 8 points. The first year I had 1 spike, that's it for the whole year. Had 1 rub, 1 scrape. In 2004, 5 years later, 200 brubs, 50 scrapes, 5 different 8 points, and then the little bucks too. I'd raised that population. I'd written about it in Quality Whitetails, and then they gave me an award for it. That is QDM. QDM isn't all about just reducing deer numbers. It's finding a balance. Again, a balance. Balance. QDM is balance. Summer food you can use to increase the number of deer, to get it to that carrying capacity of the land, so that you can find that perfect number of does and bucks. But at the same time, once you achieve those numbers, the first step in reducing the population or maintaining a population that is in balance and desirable is to reduce or eliminate summer food, because going back to number one, the Doe Factory condition is very real and is very powerful. Even John Azoga, I talked to him about this in the late 90s, early 2000s, famed deer research biologist. We talked, and he just talked about how we didn't talk about Doe Factories, anything like that, because that wasn't on our brains at that time. Now, after watching and scouting 1,000 deer parcels around the country, 26 states, it's reality. But at that time, John said there's just some properties that are all does, and there's some properties that have a lot higher percentage of bucks. That's all we boiled down the discussion to. It wasn't Doe Factories, it wasn't anything like this. But now I know why, after seeing 1,000 parcels and watching this pattern over and over and over again. Summer food creates Doe Factories. If the population is high, if you want to reduce that number, reduce the amount of food you have. If you still have too many does, get rid of the summer food. You're not taking care of the deer, folks. You add a couple more pounds and then they go somewhere else during the fall and die because you didn't really hone in on your fall habitat. Then don't pat yourself on the back. Really don't. Your lactation rates, fawn survival rates, if they're higher because you put summer food in and you had summer habitat, but then they all die in the fall, what are you accomplishing? You're not even coming close to your buck-age structure potential or your sex ratio potential if you do that. And that's what a lot of properties are, and it's not QDM. Number 3, easy hunting. One test, and I talked about another test where, number one habitat test is if you have defined, and hunting test is if you have defined morning and evening stands on your land. That's another video that we just created. If you can't tell me that's a morning stand, that's an evening stand, then major changes need to be made. Another major test for your land is when someone tells me that, we finally got that 8-year-old doe. It took us years to get, she was so wise, so savvy. It tells me your land is being managed poorly and the hunting is being managed poorly. That's a sad fact. And I think you know me by now. I only want to help you. I really do. And I'm going to call it out. I'm not going to sugarcoat this stuff because I believe in this wholly. I believed in it for 20 years. This is how I manage properties. This is how I look at properties. It makes sense when you look at it this way. But if your does are not easy to hunt on your land, you have major problems. You should be able to pick them off whenever you want. 2007, my buddy Skip and I, we shot 9 does in one day in about 5 hours of hunting because we let them gravitate to our established conditions of bedding to food every single afternoon, to where when we went out about December 10th in the doe season, at that time, the last day of the doe season, Wisconsin's 4-day doe hunt in early December, they were easy pickings. We accomplished our herd objectives for population balance with trigger control that we had to do that year all in one day. The cool thing is we didn't have to keep shooting those every year because we didn't establish a doe factory with food during the summer. We had a great fall population. There were a lot of years we didn't shoot any does. There were some that we shot 2 or 3. There were some that we shot 5 or 6 out of 12 years. And then there was the one year we shot 12, 9 in just one day. Easy to accomplish your trigger control efforts if you haven't established a summer doe factory, you don't have too much summer food. Pretty easy to hit this number 2 right here. That should be the least of your worries. Sex ratios. You have to have that hunting season herd. Your hunting season herd, I just talked about this with someone yesterday. I have something out, trail cam survey for savvy deer hunters, something like that. And talk about prime time buck survey. That's another video I have out there. Buck census, something like that. And out on YouTube, and I have articles about that too. The time to census your deer herd is not during the summer. Again, your best deer herd, your bucks shouldn't even be there. There should be a couple here, hanging out here and there. I'm a little worried in Wisconsin or Minnesota, the property I'm buying, because they've had beans in there and there are a few acres of food plots and they didn't last till October. So a lot of the pictures that they showed me on the real estate form, or I'd say 80%, 85% are during the summertime when they're in velvet. We're starting to get some good velvet pictures. The difference is I'm not planting those beans. I'm planting my normal green food plots. I'm going to plant an area of corn. Again, as the base for a food plot pyramid, you have greens as your base, then corn, then beans. I don't have enough room for beans, plus there's enough deer out there. I don't want to build a summer herd, so beans are off the table. Clover's off the table. Alfalfa, off the table. Not even consideration. In fact, I'm just right now spraying a giant clover and alfalfa field of about 4 acres because I'm going to put corn in there, because corn is what's important. That's what's going to build a deer herd. That's what's going to give me the ability to raise buckage structure, get the population in balance, and have appropriate sex ratios. If I put a bunch of beans out there right now, guess what? It diminishes each one of these right here, raises population, hurts my sex ratios, and hurts my buckage structure. That's why I'm not planting beans. That's why I'm getting rid of the clover and the alfalfa on that property. That's also why you have to take a census in October, November, preferably not over bait. When you have high pressure states, vast majority of mature bucks will not come into the bait. Different down in Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, some of the Oklahoma, some of the low pressure states, mature bucks will come into there. But you go into Michigan, a mature buck literally will not come into bait often, even under the cover of darkness, unless he's just slipping through and it's in the middle of the night, 3 or 4 in the morning. Hunting season census will tell you everything about not only your ability to be a herd influencer and actually influence these 3 biological basics of QDM, but it's going to tell you how well you're doing as a deer manager, how well the area is, how well your hunting is. If you see a lot of deer that should be there, but they're all at night, you're doing a poor job managing your hunt, maybe even the type of food that you have, your bedding areas. A deer census in August and September is no different. Hey, I like watching football. Do you? You know, the NFL, take it or leave it. I love college football. But the NFL, judging your deer property and how it did for the entire year is like looking at your Cleveland Browns or Detroit Lions. I'm a Detroit Lions fan, so I can make fun of them. And saying, whoopoo, yeah, we were 4-0 in the preseason. We had a great year. You don't judge your entire year how you did on the preseason. Taking a census in August and September is your NFL preseason. It tells you absolutely nothing unless you have a high fence around your property or unless you have several thousand acres that you can manage, some of the big southern states. And that's why the science a lot of times does not translate to quality parcels. And I'm saying 500 to 800 acres of parcels size or less, let alone a 5-acre parcel or 20-acre parcel. You have to have that fall habitat, and that's when your census should take place, and that's really what's going to tell you how well you're doing. I'll tell you about one of the primetime scrapes that we really look at, October, November. It was 2 years ago. We had 34 bucks, 34 unique bucks hit that. It's on a 30-acre parcel. 32 of those were during the daylight, and we only have 10 to 12, 15 does and fawns out there every single day. No, our ratio is not 3 to 1, bucks to does. What it is a portion of those bucks only came through. We got 1 or 2 pictures of the whole year, but they hit that spot. They hit that spot because we were using those mock scrapes. It's a very low pressure, low risk. You can look up my mock scrape playlist. I have lots of details on how to do that. Way better than bait or mineral licks or something like that. And mineral licks are only hitting the summer anyway, so what good is that? But in that one location out of 30 acres, we had all those bucks hit. Just a few handful are there, 1 or 2 pictures. A few are in and around the property quite often during the season, and a few, percentage of that are there just a portion of the time, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They're here a week. We see them 3 weeks later, a month later. We get pictures of them. Maybe they even pop up later in January, February. But bottom line is, we have that many bucks compared to those does because we have a fall parcel. We manage the hunt. And that's when you should be taking a census, because you can't be a herd influencer in August, September. You can be a herd influencer in October, November. That's when you influence buckage structure in the neighborhood, sex ratios, and that's when you can influence your population. Again, going back to those 3 principles, everything goes back to these 3 principles. Number 2, you have to have depth of cover to hit your sex ratios. You have to have room for bucks and does on your property, and that's why if you flood your property with does and fawns during the summer, those that are here today are here to stay. They're going to carry over into the hunting season, and you're not going to have enough bucks on your property to witness at least appropriate sex ratio. You're sticking the bucks somewhere else, because if they're not on your property, they're somewhere. If you're getting pictures of bucks in the middle of the night, it's not because they're sitting on a knoll 200 yards from a food plot and they choose to move at 2 a.m. It's because they were probably moving from 1.2 miles away. They had a lot of their food sources, rubs, scrapes, and other deer populations to check out, and that's why you're only getting pictures of in the middle of the night randomly in August and September. But you have to have that depth of cover, and it starts with food. So if you have food, does, and fawns, it's a really simple formula. I started writing about populations and doe layering and putting does next to food sources many years ago. I'm talking maybe 07, 06, 08, something like that. You put a high percentage of does next to the food sources they want to go to. That's the thing about does. They have a very small home range compared to bucks, even compared to bucks during the daylight, because bucks during the daylight only have a home range of, on average, probably 200 to 400 yards, not that 3 square mile garbage that science will tell you. That includes at night. A lot of times it includes their fall to winter to summer migratory patterns and movement patterns and shifting. I coined the phrase the whitetail shift years ago, and that's an average of a mile to a mile and a half that bucks will shift from their summer habitat to their fall habitat. You have quality food, does will bed within 50 to 100 yards in most habitats around the country. They want to be that close to their food sources, and then bucks behind them. Average window of buck bedding is 200 to 400 yards. So if you don't have the quality food, and you don't have that food source screened, and you don't have that doe layer bedding there, why would you expect those bucks to be back in some, quote, buck bedding area 400 yards off the food plot in a remote area? Because that's where those does and fawns are going to move to. If you don't have cover from the food until that point, the does take over the first layer. And that's why a lot of people on small properties see such a gross difference in sex ratio, because they only have room for does, and because they have summer food, they compound the problem, and the sex ratios appear a lot worse than they are. And it's probably because there's mature bucks that don't step foot on your land because they recognize it as a nighttime nocturnal property, and they learned years ago to stay clear of your land. Number 3, you have to attract hunting season bucks. You actually have to have the number of bucks in your land peaking in October and November, not in July and August. Folks, it's like a broken record, but if you want to achieve the 3 founding principles, biological principles of QDM, Buckage Structure, populations balanced with the habitat and appropriate sex ratios, you have to work on this entire combination, and you have to have a fall deer herd that maximizes your number of bucks. So what's pretty cool with all this, and this is the lowest hole in the bucket, and a lot of things in life, you can look at what's the lowest hole in the bucket. We have to plug that first. You know, we're investing in these stocks over here because some financial planner tells us to. Most wouldn't if they recognize that you're leaking like a sieve because you spend too much on your vehicles, your cable bill, going out to eat, and taking fancy vacations. You got to plug those holes first that are leaking you of your financial potential. You have to plug those holes first before you start investing. And it's the same with deer management. This all boils back to all of this, and that's the foundation of QDM and achieving the QDM biological basis. It all boils down to how your land is hunted, and that's why scientifically you can never build a QDM herd. You can only build a QDM herd first by plugging the lowest holes in the bucket. There's a lot of incredible QDM public lands out there where they've only managed the hunting pressure. They've only managed how the land's hunted. Pennsylvania, where I go to, you know, I'm not going out there to shoot 5 and 6-year-old bucks. I shot a nice 3 or 4-year-old buck last year. I drove 13 hours to do that because they've had buckage structure. They've taken care of that because they've eliminated people from shooting 70 to 80% of the young bucks by having an antler restriction. It's the only way they're going to do that. We can't just pass out memos in the parking lots around the public land saying, hey guys, why don't you not shoot small bucks? That's not going to happen. This public land where people want to shoot what they shoot. They want to see antlers and have fun and shoot. The only way to combat that, or to manage that is a better word, is to actually have antler restriction. They've done that. So for that, and they've hit the does probably too hard in some years, definitely. It's back to that normal balance right now where you have, you know, you might see 8, 10, 12 deer in a day if you know what you're doing, and you get away from people and you hunt how you should on public land, which is a whole nother playlist on my channel. But when you see those numbers, I hunted a day and a half, shot a really nice buck last year. I average hunting about a day per buck out there. I've shot 16 bucks in 19 seasons on public land in Pennsylvania. And it's never been better than what I saw the last couple years. Incredible. That's a QDM parcel, and it's 3 by 10 miles next to the Allegheny Reservoir. And that's times 100 in the state of Pennsylvania. let alone in the state of Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio, Michigan. There's some incredible public land areas that are QDM parcels because even though they haven't done any work to the habitat, they haven't had any plans as far as let's try to get this sex ratio or that sex ratio. Let's not plant any food plots and do anything. They've just managed a hunting pressure, which is always the lowest one in the bucket. So if you start that with that first, how your land is hunted, how you access the land, where your stands are at, where you're blowing your scent at, you're going to achieve a QDM parcel by not lifting a finger for the habitat. Unfortunately, most people want to sink tens of thousands of dollars into the land first and then say, well, I'm for QDM. I'm going to create the best QDM herd. I'm going to create a quality herd. Whatever someone's version of that is, but they're ignoring the hunting pressure, how they access the land. They're driving ATVs through the land. They're not worrying about their scent on stand. They're not worrying about leaving a scent trail or not. They're grabbing their cards too often for your cameras. You're creating a nocturnal herd because you're over hunting food plots. You're putting blinds in the middle of a food plot. You're spooking off deer and folks. It's not that you just achieve your QDM potential by only 90%. That's what a lot of people feel like, well, I'm going to do it this way because it's more comfortable and I'm still going to achieve QDM results. No, you're not. And that's not even if you count middle of the night. You're probably only 30% of the way there, 20% of the way there, but you're not even halfway there. And that's the problem with a lot of this. If you don't manage the hunting pressure, this is all for naught. Because you have to be able to manage deer during the hunting season. That's the only time where you're going to mold adequate buckage structure, appropriate sex ratios, and it's the only time you can actually work on your population numbers as it relates to a huntable herd and a herd that you can actually influence in the neighborhood. Folks, do this, then do this stuff, and you will have that basic QDM. You'll achieve QDM, but you have to start at the bottom first and work up. No different than that food plot pyramid where I have that green base. You fill that first, corn second, some type of high quality grain, and then you hit the beans third, but be wary of the damage beans can be done as it relates to Doe Factory summer food. If you have too many does on your property, you won't get this, you won't get that. Pretty easy. It's that basic, folks. That's how you achieve QDM. Again, QDM, quality deer management, those are the three founding biological principles of QDM. They've been around for a very long time. They've been around for a very long time, longer than I even realized or understood. You know, I became a QDM member and member of the QDMA in '98. These principles maybe started in the '80s. And the first I heard, I think they even call it quality deer management. It was a video VHS tape out of Buffalo County. I can't remember who did it. Tom Indebro might have been a part of that. And it's a long time ago. I have that VHS tape somewhere. They were talking about QDM long before anybody else was. And QDMA, again, is a great organization. I support the scientists that are working and researching deer, but science doesn't translate most often. Notice I didn't say, you know, we talk about you have to recognize a deer of a 3-mile home range. You have to have X percentage of food plot. You have to have X percentage of quality cover. You have to take a scientific survey in August and September. Guess what, guys? That applies to big properties, fenced-in properties. It's not trophy management. It's about balance. You have to have hunting as a base. And if you put this forward, then you work on these areas right here, you'll achieve these right here, and then, and only then, will you achieve a QDM herd. A QDM herd is not about intention, goodwill, and happy thoughts and great discussions with your habitat or with your hunting group. It's about action, and it's about actual results. And that's the reality check about QDM, is that if you're not getting the results, it doesn't matter how much money you're throwing at it and how good your intentions are, you're not achieving QDM. I hope this makes sense. This is the basis for all I manage. It's a basis for how I see quality public land areas around the country. That's why I drove 13 hours last year to hunt Pennsylvania by myself, because I just wanted to get out in the woods and hunt a QDM herd on public land. That's why I've driven many hours down to Ohio, 7 years, to hunt deer down there in a quality setting, because they have that QDM balanced herd that I love. And I hope you guys understand this, because if you can achieve this, the hunting on your land, and you can achieve it on very small properties. We're doing it here with 30 acres, let alone the property we're getting in Minnesota across the river over there. You can find it very easily. We're going to find it in Minnesota this first year, and I'm not being cocky about that. It's just that's the way it is. You do these things, you find it. It's pretty black and white. This isn't something that takes years on your land. You can turn it around this year, find QDM, and enjoy the success and the fruits and the labor that produce a QDM herd this fall.